Next from Springfield, we sit down with U.S. Representative John Shimkus to get his thoughts on the EPA's regulations on coal, the effect of U.S. natural gas production on the geopolitical landscape, the president's veto of the Keystone pipeline, whether the gas tax should be raised to increase funds for highway infrastructure, and Benjamin Netanyahu's address to Congress on the U.S.-Iran nuclear negotiations. This runs about 40 minutes.
Congressman John Shimkus, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel.
It's great to be back. Thanks for having me.
It's been a while since we spoke, and it's
Right.
good to be able to catch up with you. I'm going to remind some of the viewers that among your events that you've had in your background, you're a graduate of West Point, and you serve in the House. You were first elected in 1996, and you serve on the Commerce and Energy Committee. So some of the issues we'll talk about are really right in the ballpark of the issues you handle as a committeeman. And chair of the subcommittee on...
It's called Energy and the Environment.
Let's talk about a number of issues, but let me ask you this first. What are some of the issues at the top of your legislative agenda these days?
Well, I think bottom line, it's always jobs in the economy. The country's kind of waking up a little bit out of its malaise. So just a consistent debate about overregulation, taxation, and how we are able to have an environment that people want to raise capital, assume risk while you're working. So that's really the debate on public policy and the committees of jurisdiction that you have with the EPA, and are they doing too much to inhibit growth, and how do you kind of find that middle ground? We're trying to do that on coal ash legislation. We're trying to do that on a legislation called the Toxic Substances Control Act, or Chemicals and Commerce Act. We're trying to do it on some nuclear waste issues. And so that consumes a lot of my time. While we're in this environment, though, we're national legislators, so the world and Islamic radicalism, terrorism, lone wolves, security of our nation, ISIL and Russia really consume a lot of our time these days.
I want to get to all some of those things. Let's talk about regulations. How do you, as an individual lawmaker or congressman, I mean, how do you find that balance in your mind to say, is the EPA, let's say, having too much regulations? We often get into these extreme discussions, at least the public does, as if when you want to limit regulations, you're suggesting having no regulations, right, which is not what you're doing.
Right.
But where's the sweet spot? And in your estimation, is EPA, let's say on coal, are they over-regulating, or do they have it just about right?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of provisions. They should be regulating based upon federal law. I mean, that's the basis. And so some of our fights are when the federal agency is, what we feel is moving outside of federal law. So the Clean Air Act's a perfect example. When it was passed, there were four primary pollutants that were in law stated that needed to be addressed. It was particulate matter, sulfur dioxide, nitrous oxide, and I think I said particulate matter. What happened with through court and litigation, they've been given the authority to do carbon dioxide, which some people it's disputable whether it's harmful to human health, which is why we have the Clean Air Act. It's been pulled into this debate on climate change, which may have an effect on human health. Having said that, the EPA is going down this path to regulate carbon dioxide through a rule called 111D that will shut down a lot of coal-fired power plants. So our debate is high-cost power, does it do more harm to our economy and individual citizens who are poor? Because they'll bear the brunt of the increased cost because we're moving away from coal generation. So our debate is, where is the sweet spot to encourage coal-powered power plants that are efficient and clean versus just shutting them down, and how can we keep prices down? The other thing is the grid itself, our electricity that you're using here today, the lights. There is a certain amount of electricity we call base load that's needed. And then based upon the demand, other generation may kick in. But if we take out the base load, which is really major nuclear, Illinois is having that debate right now, and we take out major coal generation, and you leave the country at the whims of natural gas, wind, and solar, then you can see brownouts, blackouts, high cost, peak and valleys, stuff that we as a nation would not put up with. So that's kind of the battle that we have here.
So right now, I mean, just as I say, within Illinois, the administration wants to cut down on carbon dioxide, and coal, especially Illinois coals, high in sulfur content, is a dirtier coal than some of the other coals like from western Wyoming, let's say. But Illinois is also the #1 nuclear power state in the nation. I think 40% of our electricity comes from nuclear power. Coal in Illinois only makes up 40% of our energy pie, but 40% is a lot. And in other states, like Kentucky, it's 80%. So because of our nuclear, we use less coal. You're from a coal mining region, and one that was pretty decimated by the Clean Air Act in years past. But as you say, the thing is, how do you determine, and there's a number of examples of overreach, or people would say overreach by the EPA, which you're probably deep in any number of those issues of regulation and where's the right spot. Does the EPA comes and testifies before you? As the House of Representatives, do you have the ability to crack the whip and say, you will comport to what we say? Or to what extent do these regulatory agencies like the EPA run amok and become a power unto themselves and become basically immune to congressional oversight?
Well, the perfect example is the Waters of the U.S. provision, which where the EPA is now trying to decide or make a decision that they have control over intermittent streams, small farm ponds, even ditches on agricultural land, under the guise that the federal government has control over navigable waters. Now, we would argue you don't, because navigable means you can navigate on it, and walking across it is not a definition of navigable. So how do we respond? How do we get them back into a box, which we think they should be? We do it through two processes. One, we try to pass an authorization bill through both chambers that properly defines navigable or prohibits them from doing it.
By the way, do you mean a funding authorization?
No, the first one would be an authorization language, but the president would have to sign it. So even though we've moved the piece of legislation, if the president is a believer in his EPA and his administrator, he's not going to sign it. The other way is then maybe take that same piece of language and attach it to an appropriation bill, which eventually has to be signed if you want government to be open. We were able to restrict the administration's implementation of Waters of the U.S. in some agricultural applications in the last spending bill, but that's how we attempt to do it.
Do you ever pick up the phone and talk to the EPA director and say, come on, this is...
I have. I have. I'm a senior member now. Administrator McCarthy was just before our committee last week. So people can go to, they could check the testimony. They can probably see the clips of the question and answers. And I know her fairly well. She was going to even meet with me personally, but I was sick that day, so didn't want to give her, my whatever that crud is that's going around. But yeah, I have on especially the greenhouse gas 111D. Even some industry individuals say that the long-term plan for carbon dioxide restrictions might be obtainable, but the midterm goals are not, and they'll cause great disruptions. So some of the debate is, okay, we're not going to ever agree to disagree, but please listen to these people who are major generators, who are saying they might be able to get here in 10 years, but if you set interim goals at 5 that are unachievable, you'll cause great disruptions. Now, the final rule's not out. We don't know if she's listening to those appeals. But
So
that's
when you
what we do.
talk to the McCarthy, the EPA director, do they say, I'll cut you, I listen, I'll cut some slack, or is it just a contentious discussion?
It's not contentious. She's very nice. She's highly respected, and it's mostly like, okay, Congressman, thanks for the call. We hear your concerns. We're looking at it. We're going to talk to these other folks, and
So as if we'll take it under advisement.
yeah, pretty much.
You know, I don't know if you would agree with me, and I say this for the benefit of the viewers, that I think a lot of people out there are so distracted from paying attention to what happens in politics. I think they believe that no matter what Congress does, basically life's going to go on as it has, more or less anyway. On this electrical generation issue, though, it really is a threat to our existing sources of electricity if, with the high degree of electrical generation that comes from coal, and as we up these regulations, the cost of maintaining these coal-fired plants becomes so prohibitive that they're going to be shut down by the owners, right?
And
at
that's-
least a portion of them.
And that's where the base load debate is. So if you've got a coal-fired power plant that's doing 420 megawatts or 600 megawatts, 800 megawatts, that's a large generation versus what you do with individual generators hooked up to natural gas lines, or what you can bring on with solar and wind.
I don't want to spend, and I just don't want to jump in just so we don't spend all of our time, but on this, again, base load is when we have the electricity is produced 24 hours a day.
Correct.
And the grid has to be balanced, so they're always producing the amount that's being used. You can go out into the spot market and buy additional energy if you need it, but
Right.
that base load has to be something that's 24/7, which wind and solar are not 24/7 supplies. The wind doesn't always blow, the sun doesn't always shine.
That's correct.
And we don't have a capacity to store electricity long-term. That would be the holy
Right.
grail.
And there's research going on, but I don't think even with whatever we can store now does not nearly meet the requirements. Just look around your home. Are we using more electricity or less? We're using a lot more.
And we're talking about having electric-generated cars. Where's the power going to come from that?
That's right.
So I just want for people to know these are significant issues in the works here and could have a dramatic impact on the cost that they pay for electricity.
That's right.
Speaking of power, one of the amazing things that has happened over the last 5 years is fracking. And that has gone and produced a wealth of both oil and natural gas. And so 5 or 6 years ago, America was looking at importing natural gas because we were running out. And today, in the blink of an eye, seemingly, we are now the world's largest producer of natural gas. One, can we use natural gas to replace the coal when those coal-fired plants are shut down? And two, what do you think, as a former military man, how is that fact that we have so much energy now in North America changing the geopolitical landscape?
Well, the answer is natural gas is being used right now to help address some of these peak issues on electricity generation, and it'll have to be used to try to meet some of the standards that'll of being able to have supply. So it's going to be a big part of this debate. It's also helped us manufacturing-wise in this country. Manufacturing is coming back to this country primarily because energy costs are low, because we have a greater supply. The ability to export liquefied natural gas to countries that are at risk and being threatened by Russia and extorted because of energy, it's a great benefit to them. I focused a lot on the Baltic countries and Lithuania. A year ago, finished their import terminal, so now they have another source of natural gas other than relying on Russia.
Are we currently sending them LNG?
They are currently buying liquefied natural gas on the world market. So I know that they have gone to some providers in Texas. I mean, they're going to buy on the market just like anybody else. But now they have a choice, because now they have, and so when they negotiate with Russia, they also can have some leverage saying, you price us too high, we've got another way to bring in natural gas.
What about, again, that's Lithuania.
Correct.
Are there pipelines from that facility to where, because a lot of Europe uses natural gas from Russia, and that's always been this card that Russia hangs over their head. Is there enough liquefied natural gas coming in that Europe can feel safe against being, Putin's extortion?
No, they need more import terminals. But this is a start. This is a positive sign that our energy security now is being able to provide to some of our allies. So, or not even Europe. We're looking also the need in Japan and other countries that have a need who used to receive from it. And so nationally, we're trying to recertify our export terminals and turn them into, our import terminals and turn them into export terminals. So that's how the dynamic has changed. The debate is also occurring right now on crude oil, kind of the same type of debate a little bit. Do we do crude oil exports because now we have almost as much as we need for refining purposes? Do we put that on the world market? Do we also use that to inhibit the ability of some enemies of ours, which is Russia, Iran, Venezuela, bad actors, and make them worry about their own economies because of the lowering of crude oil prices? So it's a very interesting time on this whole energy security debate, and it's driven a lot because of this great explosion of the ability of crude oil and natural gas recovery, and primarily because of fracking.
Yeah, in many ways it's been kind of a godsend for America that's just come out of the blue. This would be a perfect time, I think. Let's jump to another issue that was, the president just vetoed, the Keystone XL. The Congress was unable to override his vote. I think it failed in the Senate by 5 votes. And yet, as we tape this on March the 6th, just yesterday, there was a train derail in Galena, Illinois. We're shipping so much of this oil that's coming out of these fracking fields by rail. And I think everyone who looks at the statistics would admit, it's just factual, that shipping oil by rail is far more dangerous than shipping it by a pipeline. Tell us your thoughts on the Keystone pipeline.
Well, Keystone should have been permitted and had moved forward 6 years ago. The only reason is not because the environmental left, who support the president and the Democrat at the time majority, made this a litmus test on whether they are going to support individuals. There is no credible argument of why Keystone and that permission to go across the boundary line between Canada and the United States, and that's what this really is about the federal government through the Secretary of State saying, yes, you can cross the federal boundary. Now, people would think, well, it's a big deal. No, we do this all the time. We've got pipelines crossing from the United States into Mexico and the United States into Canada, all over the place. Pipelines are the safest, most secure, quickest, less expensive way to move a bulk liquid product, and it's unfortunately it is, as I said, it's a political decision that's putting some of our small communities at risk as these rail cars roll through, or the environment at risk if they were to obviously dump into the river system. So you're right, there's no credible reason to say no to Keystone XL, but the president has.
When you talk about this and you try to drill down as a congressman and come to what's right on an issue, and again, let's stay with Keystone, in that estimation, what is the nature of the real objection then, do you think? Is it just the environmental community who's totally against the greater use of fossil fuels? I've never really quite understood what their objection is, because I try to look at these issues objectively, and I don't see objectively, as you said, we already have pipelines crisscrossing the nation, moving natural gas, and when you look at these various train derailments that we've seen, and up in Canada, something like 50 people were burned alive when a train derailed in the middle of their town. Those are far more dangerous means of moving and more expensive.
This is a whole fight on global warming and climate change, and the environmental left, they want less use of fossil fuels, not more. So their perspective is if there's an easier way to move fossil fuel product from Canada to the United States, that just incentivizes more use of fossil fuels, which is exactly what they want. If it becomes a captive quantity up there and it's hard to get out, then we'll use less of it. That's the whole debate.
We're seemingly jumping around, but there's been a lot of big issues here. Well, let's move off the energy issue for another thing that just happened as we record that this week. Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, spoke to the House. It was very controversial because he wasn't invited by the State Department, but by Speaker Boehner. You were in attendance, I presume. Give us your impressions of his address and the issue of Iran and the nuclear threat of Iran, and then also just about the controversy of inviting him, if that was the right thing to do.
Well, it's definitely the right thing to do. I mean, we're fighting constitutionally on the separation of powers. What the administration has to understand is that we're a co-equal branch of the national government, along with the executive branch, along with the judicial branch. We don't need the permission of the State Department, nor do we need the permission of the President to invite someone into our chambers and into the legislative branch to address us. Netanyahu did a great job. Who is more at risk by a negotiation that he can't take part in? Us or the State of Israel? The State of Israel is more at risk by what may be occurring in negotiations with them being left outside of the room. And he's, based upon what he's been able to read and hear, is that this is a bad deal for Israel. And he just gave out the history of Iran and its support for Hezbollah, Islamic radicalisms. He laid out the history of their attacks on U.S. interests and U.S. personnel around the world, and we're going to trust the Iranian government. And so I think the case was very strong. We're glad that he accepted our invitation, and hopefully it will cause the president to think twice about pushing for a bad deal.
I really don't know the answer to this. You know, on one hand, people look at you outwardly and you say, well, you're a congressman representing, I forgot how many counties now in Southern
33.
Illinois. It's quite a distance that you must have to travel to go around that. But to what extent are you engaged, speaking of energy, we just talked about Lithuania, to what extent do you get drawn into foreign policy issues? And if you do you hear directly from either people at the State Department, do you hear directly from leaders from foreign countries who might be, or their representatives lobbying you on this or that or the other issue?
Or you may hear from first or second generation U.S. citizens who are now actively involved in, in essence, lobbying or being concerned about what's going on in their parts. I'm fourth generation Lithuanian American. I'm involved with the Baltic issues primarily because of an ethnic connection that goes back to 1896 and 1898, and I'm very excited about the chance that I get to kind of listen and address their concerns. Remember, the State Department is funded by, all appropriations begin in the House. So all these authorization bills that come through as a legislative process. So even though the Constitution gives the head of state title to the chief executive, and he has a major role in foreign policy issues, the fact that we have the power of the purse and we have the legislative ability doesn't mean that we're not involved in these things, and we are very active.
I'm curious on when you, as everyone who knows, who watches the Illinois Channel would know, President Obama came out of Illinois from his political career. Did you know him when he was here in the legislature?
No, he's a Chicago-lander, so I'm a downstater. I think I met him when he was running for Senate at the State Fair here in Springfield. But I didn't have much activity because my pathway to be a representative in Washington didn't come through Springfield like a lot of members do. I was
you came out of the Metro East
I was
area.
a county treasurer, so dealing with local government issues.
One of the issues that is out there, and it's a strong interest for our agricultural community, is the rebuilding of the locks and dams on the Mississippi. Some of these were built, as I understand it, as far back as the 20s, 30s, or 40s. They're literally falling apart. America as a nation makes billions of dollars in profit off the trade of things like coal from southern Illinois going out through the Port of New Orleans, as well as the grains that we grow. And yet, it's financially common sense, it would seem, to rebuild these, because otherwise we can't move barge traffic on the upper Mississippi. We can't get funding to rebuild them. What's the holdup on something like this? I would think this would not be a partisan issue.
Yeah, the inland waterway system is one of the great attributes that we have, especially in the Midwest, whether it's selling goods and services as you laid out. We also sell, obviously, a lot of commodities up to Chicago, right? The big
I think some of the jet fuel for
limestone and, so tons of commercial goods. A lot of people don't really realize it, especially if they don't drive by one of these tributaries or these river systems. They don't see the barge traffic. But whether it's the Ohio, the Wabash, the Mississippi, the Illinois River, they're very, very important. We passed a bill in the last Congress, the Water Resources Development Act, and then we increased the user fee on barge traffic to help fund that. So we're hoping that we'll see the benefits of that directed funding to help do repair and maintenance and construction on that inland waterway system. That is an issue that we think we've made great strides over. And
Senator Durbin, I asked yesterday as we taped this, he said the problem is getting the funding for it. And I would say the average man on the street, I'm pretty much an average man on the street, I think, would say, we're spending, what is it, close to $4 trillion a year now in the national budget. We run hundreds of billions of dollars. It used to be $1.4 trillion deficits. If we're going to be borrowing that much for any number of things that don't give us a return on our investment, why wouldn't we borrow the money to rebuild these locks and dams?
well, I mean, because when we borrow money, we're borrowing money from individual U.S. citizens, or we're borrowing it from China. The Republican-controlled majority are trying to reduce our debt, not increase our debt. But again, on the last bill that we passed and accepted by the users a user fee to help to fund that. So
would that be enough to? It's going to cost. No one ever really knows, but it's projected to be somewhere in the area of, I'd say, $8 to $20 billion, depending. But again, you don't have to necessarily rebuild all of them at the same time, too.
Well, again, all I know is on that bill, what we did last year, we passed a user fee in conjunction with the barge and ferry folks who agreed to that to help that money. And my direction to them was make sure it's going to be directed funding to these repairs. And I think we're in a better position today than we were last year.
Would you, if someone said, so when will it happen, what would you say to them?
I think it's probably happening now. Now the question is, is it immediate repairs, or is it, or are they
I'm
going?
looking more for the rebuilding of it.
Well, yeah, I don't know about the rebuilding process a lot. We've got two that I know of. We've got the Mel Price down in Alton. That's probably the biggest one that we've seen.
Is a new facility, which Illinois Channel.
Right. But
And
you
that
also
can take
have
1,200 for the audience, like 1,200 foot-long barges, but the older, which are the preponderance, can only take 600 feet, which means they have to keep breaking the barges up into segments to get them
That's
through.
true. But remember, the inland waterway system is not just the Illinois and the Mississippi. It's also the Ohio, which most of those are 1,200 foot. So when you talk about that funding stream, we're also building a big one down in Olmsted that's been a money pit, which and that's part of the problem.
Where's Olmsted?
Olmsted is right next to, it's right across from Joppa, Illinois. So it's, you actually access it from, it's between
Is that on the Ohio?
Cairo. Yeah, it's on Ohio. Cairo and Joppa. It's kind of right in the middle, and it's been not the best planned and not the best appropriate use of federal dollars. And that's been part of the problem, because we are spending a gazillion dollars down there, and the return has not been what we like. It is a money pit. You have to finish it. So much so in this last bill, we kind of moved that off the budgetary line items so that wasn't sucking in all this waterway trust fund dollars.
Again, any one of these topics we could spend a whole hour on, but let's before time runs out, sticking with transportation. Everyone knows and I think applauds the lower gas prices. It's saving people, depending upon the size of their tank, $20 to $50 every time they refill.
Yep.
On the other hand, people say we need to really invest a lot more money in our transportation infrastructure. And I was talking the other day to some of the trucking associations. They said we, the Trucker Association, would be in favor of a gas tax increase if we could be assured that money would go directly into rebuilding our highway infrastructure. What are your thoughts on that?
Just what the waterway users told me, or I cautioned them about. So I think we're going to get a long-term highway bill. I'm very close to the chairman, Chairman Bill Schuster. Of course, in Illinois, we're fortunate to have Congressman Davis on board. And
Sherry Bustos is also on transportation.
Sherry Bustos, and so they know the more close interworkings of how this bill may get out.
Is there a feel, though, within the Republican caucus we're not going to raise no taxes, no how? Or is there an acknowledgement that, reinvesting in the country's infrastructure is something that is a legitimate funding?
Everybody wants to reinvest in the infrastructure. Everybody wants to move forward. Everybody wants a long-term highway bill. The question is, will a gas tax increase alone do it? CAFE standards are bigger, so you've got renewable fuel issues. You've got LNG now vehicles. You may have electric vehicles. So how do you get all the users involved in paying for? Or is there other money outside that you can bring into the debate to help make sure that if you do raise the gas tax, it's doable and accepted by our citizens, but it's not so high that they balk at it. I'm looking for
the citizens.
The citizens, right?
And just you touched on this, but I want to dig in. You said the CAFE standards. So what's happened? One of the problems, we're a victim of our own success. We used to have cars that would get 10 to 12 miles to the gallon, and now they're getting 25 to 35 miles to the gallon. So we use less fuel to get from point A to point B, and therefore we're paying less taxes into the highway fund.
So the people on the highway committee will say, if you raise the gas prices, that's gas tax.
To account for the difference in miles
That's
per
still
gallon.
not enough to meet the needs. So they're trying to look at other ways to bring in some more revenue. Again, we talked about WRDA. That came out of that committee. I think that chairman did a great job moving that bill. And I think he's going to have success in the highway bill.
We're close to closing out, but again, you're a former graduate at West Point. You spent time in the military. You're retired now from the military, you're not?
I am, right?
One of the big scandals that has actually been around for years, but blew up last year, was the VA hospital system. We heard all kinds of horrific stories. To what extent are you following that? And if you are, to what extent has any improvement been made? Or is this something that once the attention of the Congress moves on, the bureaucracy there is just going to go back to their old ways?
Well, it's a big federal bureaucracy, and they lack in some competition. Most veterans, you'll talk to, there are veterans who will swear positively that they get great service. On the other hand, these stories are correct. There's another population that'll swear at the VA, saying they've been abused, mistreated. So it's hard to throw everybody, under the same bus, because there are some who appreciate the service. A member of Congress has to be responsive to veterans' needs. It's kind of one of our criteria. Their constituents. I have 3 VA hospitals that service my constituents, whether that's Danville, whether that's Marion, whether that's Cochran in St. Louis. We all have healthcare clinics that we visit with all the time. A change had to be made at the top. There's been some firing of some mid-level managers or redesignation.
Bob McDonald, I believe, is VA Secretary.
He is.
What are your impressions? Do you know him? And I think, isn't he also a West Pointer?
He is a West Pointer, class of '74, titan of industry with the Procter & Gamble. But
how would you assess the job that he's doing, if you have any insights into it?
Well, I'm not on that committee of jurisdiction. All I know is he's got a passion to do this. A lot of big corporate titans many times get chewed up by the bureaucracy, and we hope that he continues to move forward. And I think the jury's still out. He's had some testimony. He's only been there not very long, and it's a great challenge.
I know on one hand we need to close up, but a couple of other things, if I can just quickly ask. One of the other things that's going to be blown up, there's two issues. One of the primary scandals going on is the IRS scandal. Has it been used as a political tool against conservatives groups? And we had the whole issue of Lois Lerner's emails being lost and then suddenly found. And some of the stuff you just can't make it up. Apparently there was a report the other day that the person assigned by the IRS to look for the emails was legally blind. I mean, that's not a joke. As a congressman, when you, again, it's kind of like dealing with the government bureaucracy, what's your reaction, one, to these, does the Congress have adequate control over these agencies of government so that they don't just run amok? And two, what's your take just on where we are now into that investigation?
Well, the IRS is a perfect example of how we have taken action. We've cut their funding. We've used the power of the purse. The IRS is now responding, saying we can't meet the needs of your constituents because we no longer have enough people because our budget's been cut so much. So, do I think that they? The sad thing about the IRS is no one likes to pay taxes. No one wants to be under their scrutiny. But no one, I think, ever imagined that an arm of the federal government would be used politically. And there's many of us who believe that conservative groups, whether that would be fiscal conservative groups, Tea Party groups, pro-life groups, have been disproportionately scrutinized versus other groups and agencies. And we are not through.
What do you think as an individual, Congress? Do you think that's true?
Yeah, I think it's true. No, I believe.
I think Trey Gowdy, is he the congressman running the investigation? Into
no, Gowdy's running the Benghazi, investigation. But again, whether it's IRS and you can't find emails, or now it's Hillary Clinton using personal emails based upon her work as Secretary of State. When you start losing faith and trust in the federal government that's going to have a fair playing field to all our citizens, then you really start breaking down that foundation, which we may have different sides politically, but we've got to be confident that we're going to be treated equally by the arm of the federal government. And unfortunately, this administration has not been what they advertised to be. Like, let's get together, we're going to work together, this is a new time. I think there's more distrust, more anger, more frustration and I've served in Washington a long time, than I've ever served. This is true whether it's the Bush presidency or the Clinton presidency. There's more distrust now than whenever I've ever served.
Last question then, and again, this is kind of on the separation of powers and the battling back and forth between Congress and the executive branch, the White House. And I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you. So then we have the issue of Homeland Security. The president passed this executive order on immigration. He himself had said he couldn't do it a number of times before he did do it. The Congress is saying this is an illegal act and therefore we're not going to fund it. Where are you on that? Are you on the side that says, look, we don't want to be threatening Homeland Security and the filtering against terrorists coming in through planes overseas? Or do we have to hold that agency accountable and the only way is through the power of the purse?
The answer is
I know
yes.
It's a complex issue.
Yes,
I'm trying to simplify.
Let me just tell you what we did, which I supported of the whole process, is that we passed a bill and we said, President, what you're doing is illegal, unconstitutional, and you cannot do it. Here we're funding Homeland Security, but we're prohibiting you by law. Then that was sent to the Senate. The Senate filibustered and said they would not take it up. In fact, I think they had 4 separate votes. That means they wouldn't even debate that bill. So that they did found a parliamentary process by which they split the bill. They passed Homeland Security funding and sent it back to the House. We said we want to go to conference, which is constitutionally the way to go. Send that bill back to the Senate.
So the Senate members meet with the House members and you work out your differences.
Unless they say, no, we don't want to go to conference. So that's what they said. No, we don't want to go to conference. Which then put us in While this is going on, a very important thing happened. A federal district judge weighed in and said, this is illegal, this is unconstitutional. I am demanding that there be a stay on the presidential action, that he cannot fund and do any of these things that he said until we have more time to look at it. So there's no money going to do the president's illegal, unconstitutional action. So then the debate is, if you've stopped it either through the courts or through legislation, do you shut down Homeland Security? Do you tell the Border Patrol to walk away, or you give the president the leverage to say, we're not going to control this part of the border in this time and day and age when you've got more threats than in my lifetime? The answer is, to me, it says no. We've got a responsibility to protect our citizens against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Part of the way we do that is through Homeland Security. It has to be funded. Now it's been funded up through September while we wait for the courts to intervene additionally on the president's illegal, unconstitutional actions.
And so right now they're funded through?
They are not
Homeland
funded
Security.
because the courts have weighed in and said you cannot spend money
No,
on
not
this.
the immigration, but I mean the Homeland Security.
Homeland Security is funded through a bill that we just passed 2 days ago through September.
And now the Senate would have to take it up. They
No,
haven't-
it's passed, signed into law.
Okay, so now the president can sign, you'll be good through September.
He is signed, it's done.
The new fiscal year, so for the rest of the fiscal year, because the federal. through the
Our
end of
fiscal year
September.
ends the end of September, so
Right.
all the federal government's funded through the end of September.
Okay. Well, Congressman John Shimkus,
That's right.
plenty of things. I know we bounced
Plenty
around
of
a little
things.
bit,
No,
but we
that's right.
appreciate you taking the time to join us. And
Thanks
give us
for
your
having
thoughts.
me.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
it's good to see you again.
You as well.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.